Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
That moment when you realize you are all alone in the simulation, and no one in the real world can hear you scream.
Do you silly billies not know about the object sometimes called the American device? It has nothing to do with America, it's just located on American soil. You can learn a lot about what is real and what isn't by researching it. The American device. Below is a list of the facts presented by an anonymous user on B, who claimed to have been hired to transfer classified government documents, US, from microfiche to a modern medium, presumably digital hard drives. He was contracted along with roughly 70 other people to do this work in 2007. Everything that he was reading and copying was written in a cipher code, but after working with the information for long enough, he was able to decipher what he saw, claiming that it was not a particularly difficult code. He had a background in cryptography. He did not take any notes for obvious reasons, but tried to remember as much as possible. His biggest discovery was from a number of documents involving the device. For description's sake, he referred to any corresponding parties within the documents as voices. This simply means that any government officials that are reporting their involvement or interactions with the project are not listed by name, but do describe their experiences in detail, and he could tell that they were different people. These are likely debriefing documents. The basics are as follows. There is a large square object located on Earth, specifically on American property. This description may mean that it is not actually within the continental United States, possibly some acquired territory or research base elsewhere. The object is mechanical or technological, so it is referred to, by the original poster, as the device. It is roughly 4,000 square feet and consists of 2 levels, though apparently the separation of the 2 levels is very strange and is not described well in the documents. The device was discovered by the Americans in 1941, but there may have been knowledge of it earlier than that. Strangely, it is described as out of sync with its surroundings. Botanists and geologists testing the area around the device concluded that it has been sitting where it is for an extremely long time. The author hinted at hundreds of thousands of years, but apparently these aspects of the device are hard to describe as well. Quite a lot of modern knowledge has been inspired or copied from the device. Interestingly, the author pointed out that nothing has actually been reverse engineered. This is because it is apparently impossible or extremely difficult to disassemble or dismantle anything on or within the device. The author described the device as seeming to always be on, but operating at very low power. He likened it to a facility running on emergency lights after a power outage. However, the technicians in charge do not know if this is the case. It may simply require very little power. Perhaps most important is the door or portal inside the device, which will be described further in the following posts. The original poster went into further detail about his tasks, what he was able to remember, and why he felt the need to share it on a message board. Like many others, he felt comfortable revealing secrets, since even if this was noticed by the government, it is unlikely anyone would believe him or know specifically who he is. 70 other people were on the same project. He was also quick to point out that nothing he ever read mentioned anything about aliens. Obviously, the device was not made by our civilization, but the documents never once mention aliens or spaceships or anything of the sort. After a lot of questions and the like from others on B, he felt encouraged to reveal some of the really strange things that he had read. There were basically 2 major revelations that stuck with him. He admitted that he is not an extremely smart man outside of his field, so the first revelation has bothered him for years because he cannot get his head around it. Essentially, many of the voices in the transcripts describe the device as being the only actual thing in the universe that is real, and more real than anything else we have ever quantified. The second revelation was more of an event. At some point in the 70-year history of the American interaction with the device, 4 people were inside when a door opened. This was unlike any type of door the way that we would visualize it, but those involved all describe it as a portal or gate, etc. Once fully open, the 4 people actually saw themselves on the other side. Not reflections or projected images, but 4 tangible near duplicates. Apparently there were tiny variations, but they were positive about the others being like copies of themselves. They were able to fully interact with their doubles and communicate with them, though the author either chose not to include the details of their talk, or they simply aren't recorded in the coded text. The major thing that he added was that this was completely and utterly life-changing for the four involved, in that it filled them with great humility and understanding, almost as if they now knew that they were nowhere near as important as human beings believe themselves to be. Apparently, one of the four never shows up in the documents again after this event.
Sometimes I think that our universe is like an ant farm some kid has under the bed even though his mom told him he wasn't allowed to have it. And when she finds it, she's gonna throw it out.
When the limits of our reality are shattered, the survivors will spill out into the vastness of the true universe.
If you suddenly go somewhere you've either never been or somewhere you've been just once, strange things might prevent you from getting there, and if you do get there, you might notice a glitch. This has to happen quickly without real planning. It's weird that it happens on the internet also. There was this website that claimed we're a simulation, but it's a copy of another world that is real. So there's a guy that is real. That is me. And when bad things happen to him, bad things happen to me. And I'm being run to see how I deal with them, to see what things he should try. Well, it turned out I had great difficulties accessing that website. My internet just stopped working before getting there. When it came back, I got a power outage that lasted for hours. Then the internet broke again for a while. And then when I finally managed to make the thing to load, I got a headache while reading it. And a few paragraphs later, he mentioned I wasn't supposed to know that info and the simulation would try to stop me from reading it, including giving me headaches to make it stop. Weird and surreal. But then it turned out he was just selling things, $1.60 for something, and it looked like the whole website was a giant ad for his products. I still don't know what that was about, but it's like the entire thing wasn't there when I was about to visit and they needed time to generate it. So I was held back over and over until it was ready. This is a fact. For example, once I went on a late-night walk in a weekday to an ordinary part of the city I'd never been to, and I saw a woman sitting on her window ledge taking selfies with her back leaning towards the street. I don't know how she didn't fall. When she noticed me, she became angry and stared at me like a maniac. Then she gestured like she was calling someone inside her apartment, but in complete silence. I noticed her phone was bright red. She stared at me until I passed the corner of the street and could no longer be seen from her POV.
You'll think I'm kidding, but this is the truth. When I realized this was all a simulation, I immediately started demanding to be let out. Most people are NPCs, but if you keep loudly telling everyone you run into that, you know what's really going on, and keep demanding to be let out, eventually it will get back to one of them. Just don't believe the NPCs who don't know any better, even when it seems embarrassing, or the lies or threats of the people who aren't. You won't know the difference at first, but you'll start to get an idea based on their reactions. Keep telling them you know, and don't doubt it for a single second. If you display a single iota of doubt, they'll use it against you, and this will not work, and probably never after that. Once they see any indication, they can gaslight you. So be sure in your own mind before you even try this. Just silently think about it and how nothing makes any sense if it isn't true. Once you believe that deep down in your heart, you'll be ready. When I did this, it came as a genuinely shocking epiphany due to circumstances where I suddenly knew 110%. It took some time and it wasn't easy, but eventually I got one of them to drop the pretense, which will be freaky if you're not properly prepared for it. It still feels weird, but you can't react like you're totally freaked out, or they'll see that as a sign you don't fully believe it, and then they'll start blue-pilling you again right away. So try to play it cool when it happens, because they will just suddenly break unexpectedly and start really talking to you. Keep them talking and ask the questions you have about this place. This will sound weird, but try not to think too hard about the answers you get until later. Just accept them and keep playing it cool. When you have time and privacy to think about them later, that's when you'll really be freaked out. Pro tip, they won't let you out from what I know, but there are certain things you can ask for that they will grant just to keep you going along with it, though nothing they can't plausibly deny after the fact, so don't push your luck too much. If you play your cards right, you'll get to peek outside the veil. Trust me, from what I've found out about what's outside, you won't want to leave the simulation either, and the truth is existentially horrific knowledge to live with. But if you really want to know, that's how you do it. I normally recommend against it for most people, because you're not going to like the truth. I'd tell you, but you wouldn't believe me anyway. It's something you have to find out for yourself, and then it's too late, I'm afraid.
You owe me $10 for blowing my LARP detector for this part. My advice, you started your LARP top-bottom, But at some point of the post, you realized you didn't have any bottom, a joke without a punchline. So you cop out because you ran out of ideas. And the "if I told you it wouldn't work," some stranger on the streets have to tell you the truth after you tell her you know, doesn't even make sense if you read it from a third-person perspective. Next time, start at the punchline, what you want your LARP to be about, and then build the story about it. Done this way, you probably won't end with, "I could tell you something, but you need to hear it from someone else" crap.
Nope. I could try to tell you, but I know from experience that nobody will believe it without personally experiencing it themselves. I've already told you what you need to do to find out for yourself, and have worked for a couple of people I know. They didn't believe me at first either, but I told them my method, and they tried it eventually. I couldn't do it for them or force them to do it, and I can't make you do it either. It took me years to piece together that method talking with other people who figured out the truth, or got the curtain pulled back for less replicable reasons. One of the ways we can identify each other is knowing what you will know if you ever manage to do it. I'm not just being coy, keeping it secret for no reason, or LARPing or some shit. One thing I will tell you as a point of comparison is that I used to feel an existential claustrophobia, supposedly living in a universe that might be infinite, but where I was still restricted by the speed of light. A cage with no visible boundaries that you could never reach even if it was finite is still an obvious cage. In many ways, it's worse than hitting the wall in The Truman Show. Well, the truth I know now is way worse than either of those, and nothing any LARPer could ever guess or dream up. Just imagine how bad it would have to be for Truman to want to go back into the dome and live out his life there like I'm doing now, knowing it's mostly all fake.
I know I can't die, because I should have died back in 2016. Someone nearly killed me because of their stupidity. I should have died from underlying factors from heat stroke. But miraculously, I survived. I was vomiting blood, fading in and out of consciousness. I knew something was wrong when I survived. If I can't die or leave this sucks, I don't want to grow old and do this dumb thing.
You're not the only one to have had that kind of experience. You can never prove it's not because you have to be alive to talk about it, but it is as you suspect. As you know, you can still feel pain, get injured and maimed quite easily though, which is why I wouldn't recommend trying to attempt to really find out for sure, and won't help either way. That kind of thing tends to just make your life worse regardless of outcome anyway, from what I understand. At least aging is not what you think it is though.
Tell me more. Also, what do you think about the Grabavoy numbers? Are those cheat codes for real?
No, goes for numerology and similar things in general too. Pro tip: basic intelligence begins with noticing patterns, but advanced intelligence begins with figuring out when the patterns you think you see are not actual patterns at all. Think of a predator being fooled by a lizard mimicking the colors and pattern of a poisonous snake. If a predator were as smart as a human, even though it lacked the capacity to tell the difference due to the limits of its senses and how its brain interprets shit, it might figure out inside its mind some way to accurately distinguish the two without getting bitten by poisonous snakes. In a similar way, you can think your way out of the simulation, even though you can see when you are in it. Which in the above analogy is like a predator deducing the existence of mimics from scratch, even though it has never knowingly seen one. After which, and devising a successful test, it knows a percentage of the snakes it sees every day are actually lizards, even though it still can't see the difference with its senses. To answer your question though, you can test any of that stuff. It's relatively harmless. You just have to have an independent way of assessing the results. Like if you thought a rabbit's foot was lucky, you have to honestly keep tabs on all the times you are unlucky wearing it as well to know if it actually works. Spoiler: it doesn't.
How do I download data for something I want or need?
That's the one thing I can't really get anything even close to a straight answer on. I don't even know what we are. I don't know what they are. Sometimes I wonder if I even really exist at all in a technical sense.
I've heard of people downloading data somehow. In this game, it could be fake. Also, tell me how to talk with the creator of this game, or see outside. I want to do it.
Still not sure what you mean by download data, but don't know anyone who has seen the creator if there's one. Only those who seem to be inside involved in running it. Anyone outside is like a shadow at best. Again, hard to describe in normal terms. One of the reasons the best method I know is my first long post, where you go after the more obvious of them that you can solidly perceive in some form. It's weird after, knowing that person is one of them after they revert to acting normal again, and not easy talking to them again out of character to ask more questions, even though you busted them the first time. They will tend to disappear from your life sooner rather than later either way. But don't be stupid and try being too aggressive or trying to spy on them or something. We had a few guys try that kind of shit and it did not go well for them.
Think of it more like you're in a public place and you recognize a celebrity in disguise, kinda sorta trying to be inconspicuous. You walk up to them and call them by name, and they plead ignorance, deny being who you know they are, give you a false name, lie and keep lying repeatedly, but you keep calling them by their name and politely calling bullshit. Let's say it's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, not because he'd be able to disguise himself very well, but because he wouldn't be physically intimidated by you. Also, he has a nice guy image, so let's say he's less worried about being discovered or not being able to leave, and more about causing a negative scene unnecessarily, or his family being bothered. But despite all that, eventually he feels forced to admit it. Then you say, "Hey man, I don't want to cause you any trouble, but it's cool to meet you in person. And since we happen to bump into each other, I'd really appreciate your autograph if that's okay with you." In that situation, he's just more likely to comply. Since you've technically done nothing wrong, you're 100% correct. It is him, and he's the one who has been lying to you. He's just more likely to feel it's fair enough. But you're not really blackmailing him either, since he never really had to admit it. Probably has security nearby who could drag you away if he really wanted to, etc. And at the same time, you're going to get a very different reaction if you ask for money or make some demand that's over the line. Or too many, mainly because you have no real leverage and you both know it. Law of attraction only works insofar as you thinking about what you want and seeing opportunities, etc. A positive affirmation at best, which is not a bad thing, but winning the lottery because you thunk hard enough. Nope, sorry. This might be a simulation, but nobody is listening individually day to day, at least not to that kind of thing anyway.
In reality, what kinds of things can be asked for? Why do you think you can't take it too far? Have you tried? I have some experimental evidence that it's real. The question is, how far does it really go? It's more than confidence and noticing possibilities. If it's not real at all, I'm the luckiest person to have ever been born. Currently focusing a little more on worlds within worlds, or reality shifting. Though that was 100% a LARP, now I'm not so sure. It may even be required for some things. I didn't understand. It's not the Truman Show? Curious about your opinion on agents like from The Matrix. I've noticed the people in my proximity have sometimes reminded me of other people who aren't present, as if there are only a few others, and they skinwalk to roleplay as the various people around me. Doesn't account for huge events like sports and concerts. In my LOA, I'm working on a specific person, and sometimes I think relevant people are playing characters nearby to see if I'm fully ready for my specific person.
Mostly information, but I'd characterize most things granted as removing arbitrary artificial barriers. Like in my case, I damaged my reputation quite a bit talking about being in a simulation, especially with my NPC wife who thought I was nuts, of course. But I wanted her back more than anything, even knowing what she is. She's one of the few things that makes knowing and living in here somewhat tolerable for me. There's no way that could have happened if this were real life, or for a normal woman to ever just drop something like that. But it's like they fixed her somehow, and we went back to normal relatively quickly. The kids are young, and they seem to just forget over time. I even got my career back due to NPCs suddenly treating me relatively normally, even endorsing me to real people. That took a little longer again. I've been observing my wife the most throughout all this. It's almost like that Mr. and Mrs. Smith shit where she finds out he's a spy and starts plotting accordingly, but then he finds out she is too and it turns the tables back. Meanwhile, they can't openly talk about it. Like me finding out she's an NPC made everything okay, but we can never really talk about it either. I don't know if they reprogrammed her or whether she's some kind of AI who actually understands shit, because I don't know what NPCs really are. I'd be lying if I didn't say it gives me the heebie-jeebies sometimes though, like she could just go Full Metal Mrs. Smith and suddenly mask off attack me or something. Most of the time it feels like she loves me and just doesn't know, but now and then I'll catch a look or a vibe that creeps me out. I ended up better than where I started in many ways, I think, because I just understood, accepted the reality, and wanted my old life back. People who made knee-jerk, impolite demands disproportionate to their actual leverage were not only denied, but seemed to somehow wind up worse off in a way that seems to be indirectly correlated. We don't have too many data points between us, so I can't be sure. Knock yourself out if you want to try. I just have reason to believe you won't get anywhere at best and suffer negative consequences at worst. I'm not sure why. I'm not even sure it's intended as punishment per se. They seem to understand our feelings about our predicament on some level. I think that's why they were sympathetic enough to grant me the concessions they made. I guess there's no reason to beat a domesticated animal that accepts its lot in life, and you'll even be kind to it to some degree even when you don't have to, while still not treating it as an equal either. I don't even know if that's a good analogy for what's going on, but you get the idea. Maybe there's just no reason for Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to be a dick or deny an autograph to a fan at the end of the day unless you give him one. Law of attraction. Notice famous, successful people tend to believe this shit, but people only listen to them if they are famous. All wannabe actors want the big part, but only one gets it. All businessmen, stock market friends want to be rich, but only a few make the right choices at the right time. You never heard of the ones who didn't, or their opinion on whether LOA works or doesn't. Most people will not win the lottery, but it's almost a certainty that someone will. If there were something else going on like LOA, you'd see a distortion in the probability distribution, like someone else getting to play Tony Stark in the next movie because he didn't wish hard enough that year. More and more people winning the lottery at once, or an unprecedented boom in mining and technology because most of the investment would go toward the mining companies that do find gold, the tech companies that do make successful products, the businesses that don't fail. Think about it at the ideal extreme. If you had a time-traveling DeLorean and could pick all the right stocks and keep doing so until you made all the money on Earth, and you'd be doing the world a favor, because there would be no malinvestment at all. You'd effectively be some King Solomon-like figure, an oracle that people bring their investment ideas to, and you tell them if it's even worth doing or not. Every worthwhile venture would be funded and succeed in the best way possible. Gambling would be impossible since you could put any casino out of business overnight. In the real world, your skills and effort will give you an edge, so don't think it's all just luck. Thinking you can do it beats thinking you can't, etc. LOA is theoretically a quantum matter. The parts of the universe we don't interact with or ignore entirely will tend to be close to the statistically average with few anomalies. I believe that LOA is a way to bring your consciousness to inhabit the one of the many universes the fifth dimensional aspect of us travels through, to the one in which your goal, despite being statistically anomalous, is already in a state of existence. I do think, though, that in such a model, you are not making leaps, but you are traveling through individual universes to reach point B from point A, exploiting probability in each case to take another step, probably in the path of least resistance. I say believe, but I don't really believe it. That's just what I figure. I'm too lazy to even finish the latter experiment. It's not the Truman Show. No, since there are literally hundreds of millions of real people in the simulation at once, I don't think they are looking at the finer details or particularly care about individuals. Like, I have no fear they're even reading this post or would especially care about it if they did. I think that's why it's so hard to even get anyone's attention in the first place, and why it's necessary to stick to your guns so hard. It's almost like they're making minimal effort to even keep the simulation a secret, and it's probably because they don't have to. We had one woman who basically randomly no-clipped, for lack of a better term, and overheard them having a conversation about shit. Events like that are extremely rare as far as we can tell, so I wouldn't sit around waiting for it to happen to you. We think this is basically why, if pressed persistently enough, they'll eventually just flat out admit it. Like you're getting someone to admit they ate the last piece of pizza, as if there are only a few others and they skinwalk to roleplay as the various people around me. Not saying it's impossible. I don't know. I've just never had any reason to believe they're doing anything like that. Since we're outnumbered by agents, I don't like to use that term because it's kind of misleading, and NPCs, I don't see why they would. I still don't even know why real people are the minority either. It's a very rough estimate, but something like around 15% real, around 80% NPCs, and 5% agents, which I prefer to call them. I don't think the NPCs routinely report information back to them at all, and my best guess is that along with the ratio is indicative of a general lack of interest in the minute details of what goes on in here.
Simple. It's like waking up from a dream. The difference is that you go from 3D world with time dimension to whatever dimensional configuration yourself, which is not human, came from.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.